Welcome, welcome to the Hard Skills Show, where we discuss how to develop the nuanced hard skills, meaning the most challenging soft skills needed to make a real impact through your leadership. I love when we get started. Those of you who are watching live right now are going to see the recording of the video when our guest already starts bopping to the music because I love this music. It's always great when our guests enjoy it as much and get me moving. So thank you, Frank. Great to have you on the show. I'm your host, Dr. Mira Branco. I'm a leadership consulting and coaching psychologist, founder of the TowerScope Leadership Academy, an associate professor, a Psychology Today columnist, author of The Millennial's Guide to Workplace Politics, and had my own leadership career before transitioning to helping teams and high-achieving women navigate their leadership complexities. Thank you for joining us today on our journey. Now, the question that we're answering today is what complex changes are happening in the healthcare sector, and how does that affect patient, provider, and organizational success? In this episode, we talk with Frank R. Harrison about the rapid post-pandemic changes experienced by hospitals, opportunities and challenges with technologies, including AI, and navigating the labyrinth of the system. This is a really good topic for season 4's focus on navigating complexity. Now, before I introduce you to our guest today, I do have a really big announcement. So Frank, you're here to hear my big announcement too. We will be opening our doors again in a few weeks for our next cohort in the TowerScope Leadership Academy. We're building a community of high-achieving, growth-minded leaders looking to expertly navigate today's complex workplace dynamics within disrupted industries and make a greater impact. So today's episode is all about that. If you want to learn more about our Leadership Academy, you can apply and check us out at gotowerscope.com and click on Leadership Academy. Okay, now, without any further ado, I'm excited to introduce our special guest today, Frank R. Harrison, equipped with an MBA from the Fordham Gabelli School of Business, concentrating in global marketing, finance, and international management, and a master's of arts in psychology and neuroscience, and a certificate in public health advocacy through Cornell University and the New York State Department of Health. Frank R. Harrison has 30 plus years of experience, including executive roles spanning financial industries, entertainment, and new media industries. Yes. His business experience, coupled with his health training, has led to these really interesting healthcare ventures and advocacy programs and media platforms, all for the purpose of illustrating his research and interest and desire to strive for social change one person at a time, especially through the healthcare sector. He has a really interesting healthcare platform, healthemedia.com. We will show you that later if you're watching, and we will spell it out as well. This is a division of his new venture, Health E Media Incorporated, and he brings these ideas to life through his podcast, which, by the way, his podcast is Frank About Health, which happens to also be a sister podcast. Should I call it brother podcast? A sister podcast. It sounds better. On Talk Radio.
It's podcast fluid.
Podcast fluid. Okay, great. On talkradio.nyc, and he airs at the same time, but on Thursdays. So if you're already available at this time, go hop on over on Thursday and listen to him as well to hear about his commentary on the healthcare sector and the complexities that he and his guests face all the time, right? So he welcomed me so warmly on his show last year when I started with talkradio.nyc. And now it's come full circle. Nearly a year later, we're continuing the conversation on my show. So welcome, Frank.
Thank you, Mira. Let me tell you, literally, not just on Frank About Health, but when I saw your very first show, and I got hooked onto the music right there and then, but every other subsequent show afterwards, I just found myself literally getting another education. Now, I have already, I believe, been self-educating when I've been living through the pandemic, as we all have. at the same time, while doing now 3 years of Frank About Health, every time I have a guest on the phone, well, on Zoom rather, I all of a sudden find that I've learned something new about myself through what the work I've been doing and what they've added through the conversation that allowed me to even enhance whatever work I'm doing on the side, but make it better.
That's
So
awesome.
what I love about the podcast platform is that it is like virtual school. And when I saw that you had Tower Scope, I thought to myself, I wonder how I could sign up to be part of it. But I gather you have to have a lot of credentials and you have to be in a career track that is actually serving the role of a leader in whether it's a healthcare organization or an organization itself that probably deals with social change. Correct?
A little bit. Thanks for asking, because that's a really good question. So, in order to qualify for the Towerscope Leadership Academy, it is women-centered. It doesn't we don't just accept women, but you have to be willing and open to talking and engaging with us about experiences of women navigating these systems. Most of them do have leadership roles internal to an organization, right? Where they're in some kind of formal leadership role, but not all of them. Some of them have navigated leadership and are stepping out of it and want like sort of a pathway for what does this mean to be an informal leader or to lead without the formal position, right? Because you can lead in any space.
Correct.
And some of them might end up even owning their own companies, right? And navigating other systems, multiple systems. And they have kind of similar experiences. So for those of you who are interested, you could just go online, go towerscope.com, Leadership Academy, and there's all the criteria and lots of questions that you can ask yourself to see if you might be a good fit. So Frank, thank you for asking. I appreciate in case people are wondering like who would be a good fit. So thank you.
Well,
now, everybody.
by default, by watching your podcast every week, I've been taking my notes, as you always say.
That's right. That's what I was going to say.
I think it was part of the inspiration for how I developed healthy media over the past 6 months.
Aw, Frank, you are the kindest person ever. So, everyone, are you ready for Frank? Let's get started. Get out your pens, everyone, and paper. Okay, if you're like me, I'm old school, pen, paper, right? Okay, but if you use a device to take notes, that's okay. Use your device, reflect deeply, take your notes, identify at least one small change that you can pull out of what Frank will share today to develop your hard skills muscle.
Correct.
Okay, so let's get into it. I'm curious, like, what are you most excited to teach people today?
Well, I would have to say I'm most excited about like what Sam says on his show, creating awakenings. In other words, when we were all going through COVID, I was the only one in my family because we were all confined together for about 5 months here in New York State. But I was the only one already looking for who are the resources or what are the resources I need to look for in terms of treatments, vaccines when they were finally released. I was one of those individuals, without getting political, that listened to our governor at the time, Andrew Cuomo, every single day as he was putting every restriction on the city and well, basically on the state. And I was also, ironically, one of the first victims to have COVID a week after the city shut down.
Wow.
So watching how I went through that and then trying to prevent my family from catching it, considering my father was also recovering from prostate cancer, I didn't want to be the cause of something more terminal, if you know what I mean. But that being said, by default, out of necessity, I found myself just creating this organizational structure in my mind. How can I work through, as you've said, the labyrinth of the uncertainty of how are we going to survive this pandemic? How long is it going to last? What resources do we need that we don't have? I mean, ironically, at the same time, the birth of new technologies like Zoom came about for everything, teaching, learning, having reunions with friends, even working, so forth and so on. So I think it was the 13th of March, 2021. No, 2020, before we got shut down the week later, where I bought my first Google Chromebook. I was already prepared to be on the cloud with everyone for anything, So I guess I always had the foresight. And when we were all faced with the unknown element of COVID-19, I just went vigilant and did everything that I could to just use this piece of meatloaf up here. That's something someone told me the other day, so I'm just reiterating that. But use this to actively and incentivize myself to get stuff done. So that being said, what am I interested in making people aware of today, which was your question?
Yeah.
Own your mind, own your needs and feelings. Don't think, oh, wait a minute, I should be feeling this way. Oh, no, the COVID will disappear soon, or whatever the circumstance may be. Everyone has to advocate for themselves in healthcare, period, pandemic or no pandemic.
Mm.
And especially if you are dealing with a chronic illness, it could be a mental health illness, or it could be a physical cancer, diabetes, whatever it might be. Most people seem to have, from my observation, the view that the doctor knows best. Well, that may be so, based on their credentials, their research experience, so forth and so on. But you are going to someone to help you manage a better way of life, whether you have an illness or not, but you can never take a passive role. You have to interchange with that individual and work together for the cause of maintaining your health care. And most people, I don't think, learned how to do that. I think it was the pandemic that forced me to do that, but I'm not everybody. And most people still to this day, even post-pandemic, have resorted back to some of those old ways. So I, however, have become even more vigilant.
Yeah. I mean, I wonder if this is also generational because, those of us who are older, and especially even like my parents' generation, you were taught to trust your doctor, not ask questions, go, once a year for your checkup, all of those things, right? But I think it's gotten so complex right now that even doctors are finding it challenging to track everything that's happening because they're not all in the same system, right? Even sometimes when they're in the same sort of medical record system, it can be hard to track who saw what for when, and that kind of thing about a patient that you all share. But if you're going to different medical professionals across different systems, it is your responsibility to be tracking, what so-and-so said, but this said, and here's the medications I'm taking and that kind of thing, because you're going to get a lot of questions from your doctors about this anyway when you visit. And I don't think a lot of, folks from, the older generation, including me, were necessarily taught to do that, right? Because I think things were a little bit simpler in terms of like how many doctors you went to see and how many clinics there were available and how many specialties there were. So I really appreciate this not taking a passive role. I'm curious for you,
Right.
Was there a time that you took a more passive role where was there a formative moment in your own personal journey where you realized, I need to be much more active in my healthcare advocacy and tracking?
That time was definitely COVID, but I guess I already had the prerequisite because being an epileptic, I've been taking care of my healthcare since I was 16 years old. So I already had the impetus or the incentive, but it wasn't as big as it's become. So
Yeah.
I guess maybe the experience of being an epileptic, as I've indicated on Frank About Health, has been a gift for me because it was the seed that allowed me to germinate my own entrepreneurial leadership style in creating healthcare organizations over the past 15 years, I would say by now.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we come back, we're nearing an ad break, and you're listening to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest, Frank R. Harrison. When we come back, I'd really like to sort of explore what does it mean to not take a passive role? What does that look like? I think people with chronic illnesses have done this better than those of us who are new to this concept, right? So would love to dig into that. We air on Tuesdays at 5 p.m. Eastern for The Hard Skills. With Frank About Health airs on Thursdays at 5 p.m. Eastern. But today, if you would like to join our online audience and ask any questions, that we can answer in real time right now. If you're listening right now, find us on LinkedIn or YouTube at talkradio.nyc, and we will answer your questions. We'll be right back with our guest in just a moment.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a high-achieving, growth-oriented leader? Are you interested in developing your authentic leadership while creating a healthy, inclusive workplace? Hi, I'm Dr. Mira Brancu, host of The Hard Skills on talkradio.nyc at 5 p.m. Eastern on Tuesdays, where we discuss how leaders develop the hard skills needed to make a greater impact. We interview experts, have live coaching, and tackle these challenges. Listen to The Hard Skills on Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a business owner? Do you want to be a business owner? Do you work with business owners? Hi, I'm Stephen Fry, your small and medium-sized business or SMB guy, and I'm the host of the new show, Always Friday. While I love to have fun on my show, we take those Friday feelings of freedom and clarity to discuss popular topics on the minds of SMBs today. Please join me and my various special guests on Friday at 11 a.m. on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Welcome back to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest today, Frank R. Harrison of Frank About Health. And we just got a Twitch comment, Frank, from Cerebral Wind, who says, whoa, another crossover. I suspect maybe you know each other, maybe?
Yeah, you look familiar. Of course we know each other. Absolutely.
Okay. Well, nice to meet you. I love that name.
Academically, we both studied neuropsychology, so.
Nice. Love it. And I love that name, Cerebral Wind. That makes sense for neuropsychologists.
Exactly.
All right. So let's talk about you. We ended with this sort of idea of don't take a passive role in your healthcare.
Right.
People with chronic illness know this a little bit better than the rest of us. So I'm curious to hear from you. What does that mean about not taking a passive role? What does it look like, Frank?
Again, all from observation, what it looks like is that everyone perceives that the healthcare system consists of doctors, nurses, technicians, EMT workers, hospital administrators, but it's as if the patient isn't part of that equation. The patient is more like a customer or a client. And when I don't know if it's like you said, it could be an intergenerational process where when you go in as a patient and when you're a child, you really resist going to the doctor. You don't want that shot or whatever it is that you may need. But when you're an adult and you're really in charge of your own healthcare for your loved ones, for your career, for yourself, you have to assume the self-imposed leadership role of patient. Now, I know that there are possibly doctors and nurses and other professionals watching the show right now, and they have just as much of a valuable leadership position in treating the patient. But there has to be an understanding that I've seen has worked for me, where the patient, along with the medical practitioner, are creating their own team, where the case happens to be you, the patient. But when an individual is taking a least passive role, they're able to talk about themselves, not in so much in third-party language, but they're able to say, okay, we've already seen from previous test results. I mean, I'm giving a pseudo example. We've already seen from previous test results that the size of this mass has increased. but I've already tried these following prescriptions and it doesn't seem to be working. However, I found out there's this other possible alternative. Can we together determine if it is suitable for my treatment? Versus, what do you mean it didn't work? What am I going to do? Am I going to die soon? I mean, that's an extreme case. But a lot of people who are in the middle of that spectrum that I just illustrated end up feeling confused and don't know what to do. And they're reaching out and talking to friends and family who also don't know what to do. And therefore, the way I say that they can learn what to do is to just feel fueled enough by the anxiety they might feel to go into any technology that currently generates any healthcare information you're looking for. Obviously, artificial intelligence is number one there. Or watch podcasts that are health oriented where people like me, I'm basically an individual that has done research in the field of psychology, but I treat every healthcare situation from a psychological point of view. And therefore, when I'm dealing with, even today, just 2 hours ago, and I don't mind saying this on your show, I was at the Perlmutter Cancer Center of NYU Langone Health, watching my father get evaluated for his ongoing cancer treatment, and there appeared to be a metastasized mass on his rib, but it's under control. Yet, when we were told about it yesterday, it was not told in the right way. And then I went doing all my research. Ironically, I thought it's perfect for this particular show, knowing I was going to be your guest today. And I basically asked the doctor all the questions that I knew my father nor my mother could ask. And I got every answer within 5 minutes. Well, 10. But the thing is that I went out of there excited rather than feeling in despair. Oh, no, another challenge. Oh, what am I going to do about that? No. I said, let me advocate for this situation, go into crisis management mode, use the technology that has been presented to us. And I give COVID credit for that because we had high rollouts on everything, including the mRNA vaccine, which I do believe works. But again, that's my opinion. I'm not imposing that on anyone who doesn't believe in the vaccine. Yet, what I really am saying is that today's healthcare system, in order to bridge that intergenerational divide, is being bridged together through technology, through AI, through the information that is out there. People just need to feel incentivized by their own fear, anxiety, confusion. It's the navigating complexity, right? Yeah. But taking care of yourself, which most people learn somewhere along the line not to do first. I don't know what the issues are. It's relative. But when it comes to, you can't do anything in your life without having at least a respectable quality of life. So health is number one in my book. And that's why I would say to take a least passive role, start engaging in your own healthcare, like the way you engage in your career, the way you engage with family and friends. There are the emotional dysregulation that occurs when you're dealing with potentially facing your mortality, but knowledge is power. Once you have the information that you can work with, you just look at it as a journey and not a final destination. And I think that's kind of what goes on in our minds unconsciously, especially when you're already disarmed with not having the accurate information, and potentially the healthcare professional is not communicating in the way you need to be, and you need to get your information.
Yeah, I really appreciate there's a lot of empowerment here that you're speaking to, and I'm thinking about a lot of things here. One is that it makes me think about my father-in-law, who gets really nervous whenever he sees something in his medical chart that could be scary, but he doesn't ask in appointments. And then we follow up and we say, okay, what did you find out from the doctor? And he's like, I don't know. What did you ask the doctor? I didn't. Right. And so sometimes it's just because either our upbringing about like, no, you can't push back, or ask anything, it's disrespectful or whatever, or because our anxiety is getting the better of us and we can't think straight in the moment because we're so nervous. And I've been in that situation where I was just so nervous about a procedure that I could barely respond to the questions or keep track of what they were telling me. And what you're sharing is there are times when we're not in that, anxious headspace where we could advocate for ourselves, and it's very empowering.
Yes.
And in those situations, you come to the doctor and you say, I've been tracking these symptoms. I've been trying this. Here's what I've learned. And now I need help. What do you think? I'm telling you, doctors appreciate that so much because it's data that they don't have. And my doctor has said many times, like, wow, you took great notes. Thank you. Right. So when I'm in a good headspace, I can do that. In other situations, if you're undergoing a procedure and you're really nervous about it and you're going into it nervous, bring an advocate. Like Frank was saying, he serves as an advocate to his parents, right? Like he serves as the extra brain just in case you can't think straight in the moment. Either way is fine, but you are adding your voice into the discussion. And most doctors appreciate having more information instead of less, because that makes them feel better equipped to answer your questions or to help you, right?
Right. I mean, as a matter of fact, to echo what you said, a lot of them have gone to 8 years of medical school and fellowship training and residency training and God knows what else. But they were students once before. When they get an individual patient asking the right questions, it's like positive feedback. They know what they're doing. So I guess maybe that was part of what motivated me to really advocate, not just for myself or advocate for my family during COVID, but even now with my father's cancer. And just yesterday, advocating for my cousin, who we're now looking for daycare facilities for, just allowed me to understand that healthcare is so confusing to everyone because they call it an industry or they call it a profession, but it's both and more, and when you're a patient, that's an industry unto itself, but I think both of us being blessed with psychology education, we learn to think more strategically than probably most. I mean, I know that you have more relationships in the industrial organizational realm, but at the same time, having worked for Citibank and Sony Music and even now in creating my own enterprise, I have to think that way too, to at the same time understand what the healthcare need is for what I'm providing. So I think by default, like I said, COVID was a catalyst for me, but it already took my existing skills and integrated them together over time. And thanks to technology, it has allowed me to really grow this platform. And of course, thanks to the many guests I've had, including yourself, there's no way I could have continued doing the advocacy if I found myself limited with the information or even the issues that were important for all of us to know.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're reaching another ad break. When we come back after the ad break, we just went through what you can think about in terms of patient level advocacy, right? At the individual level, what do you have that's within your control that you need to know about in order to navigate a highly complex system? How can you empower yourself or bring in an advocate to help you and feel empowered to navigate the complex system? When we come back from the ad break, what I'd like us to move from is that patient level or patient-centered focus to let's talk about industry trends, right? What are you tracking? You're an MBA, right? What are you tracking around healthcare access for patients and providers, around different systems and how they're set up to help patients? I'm curious about that organizational level trend next. You're listening to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest, Frank R. Harrison. We air on Tuesdays at 5 p.m. Eastern, and we'll be right back in just a moment.
Hey, everybody, it's Tommy D, the Nonprofit Sector Connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on talkradio.nyc, I host a program, Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on talkradio.nyc.
Were you an essential worker during the pandemic? If you needed to learn stages of epilepsy, did you depend on advocates? Did you use new innovations to cope with mental and neurological issues? Maintaining high quality of life and keeping good mental health are what we all strive for. I'm Frank R. Harrison, host of Frank About Health, And each week, top healthcare influencers, professionals, and innovators answer these questions and more. Stay tuned on Thursdays at 5 p.m. on talkradio.nyc, and I will continue to be frank about health with all of you.
Are you a business owner? Do you want to be a business owner? Do you work with business owners? Hi, I'm Stephen Fry, your small and medium-sized business or SMB guy, and I'm the host of the new show, Always Friday. While I love to have fun on my show, we take those Friday feelings of freedom and clarity to discuss popular topics on the minds of SMBs today. Please join me and my various special guests on Friday at 11 a.m. on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back to the Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest today, Frank R. Harrison. All right. So we just talked about the patient level access and navigation.
Right.
Let's talk about what makes it easier or harder for patient access and navigation at the organizational level. What industry trends are you tracking currently around this?
Well, overall, especially since I had been motivated to advocate for my immediate family, I was looking at three particular trends up front. First of all, reputation of the hospital system. Second of all, how technologically up to date are they? Because we were seeing a technological revolution during the pandemic across the board with your mobile phone, with your computer, with just even the way you would order and live by Uber, among other things that have to Instacart, because we couldn't go outside to shop. So we were ordering everything through Instacart. Now, that being said, I looked at the various hospital systems, including the one that I've been affiliated with most of my life, which is NYU Langone Health. I also looked at Mount Sinai. I looked at Bellevue Hospital, part of New York City's H&H system, health and hospital system. And I also looked at other individual hospitals that were specialty care services that ironically ended up being purchased by Mount Sinai. So when I started seeing that activity going on, I wanted to stick with what already was working for me, but also because of the COVID pandemic and the uncertainties that were going on, Mount Sinai was really getting up there in terms of being the first to issue, I think it was the Moderna vaccine. And then weeks later, the Pfizer vaccine. So that's where I got my first two shots at Mount Sinai. But as I said, most of my doctors, especially at the Epilepsy Center, have been affiliated with NYU Langone. That's where I did my thesis, my master's thesis on the relationship between epilepsy and mental health. And therefore, the one other aspect of why I was preferring them is because they were also a teaching hospital. I know that Mount Sinai in particular has a teaching hospital, but there doesn't seem to be the connection the way that the hospital system at NYU was an outgrowth of your practical experience that you were learning in med school. In this particular case, it seems as though that Mount Sinai was just trying to expand its reach, and they had a relationship with a school of medicine that they either acquired outright or probably already had, but they just didn't have the academic experience the way they had expertise in certain specialties like cardiology or even in neurology. So when I looked at those two systems, I already said up front, I'm not looking at the public health system because they don't like insurance. They also triage you to death, even if all you need is a Tylenol for a headache. And I just thought, we're in the middle of a pandemic. If I'm going to do telehealth, that's another trend I'm looking at. I want to do it with a system that is equipped for it. And NYU was right there up front. So I guess, again, looking at the trends was all as a matter of necessity. But as we got out of the pandemic and as I launched Frank About Health, I started really zoning in on at least those two systems because, as I said, Mount Sinai was very good during the pandemic and NYU Langone was very good for maintaining my condition with epilepsy and helping my father through his cancer. So I'm not saying that you have to choose one or none. You can go diverse if you need to, sort of like it's an investment in your life. So you want to expand your portfolio where you're going to have the right doctors for the right treatment. And also, when I do look at the the doctor's experience, what medical school did they go to? Are they published? Have they won awards? You know, where is it that they're also possibly bringing in their interns to attend your session and learn about your case? And that's happened to me about 4 times that I can think of. And when they do, I'm excited. I feel like that we're going to talk about my health, but you're going to learn something. So by default, because of my personality and the way I approach healthcare, most of the quality of care I seek for myself and my family is at NYU Langone Health. And that's because I know that when I'm getting treated, I'm also learning and they're learning something. Because that is the kind of hat that I think makes anyone feel comfortable, especially when they're faced with the duress of, oh, I have a condition that could be fatal if it's not treated on time. Mount Sinai has clusters of good work in some departments and questionable work in others. And so going back in my Rolodex of the corporate structures of things, like I learned a lot in the music industry, there came the concept of vertical horizontal integration. Horizontal integration in layman's terms is like everyone is a family and they all deal with each other collectively. That's not always smart though in a world like healthcare. So vertical integration is pretty much where, I mean, I can give you the actual corporate definition. I think that the listeners out there, especially if they're not in healthcare, should know what that means. Let me just do that for a second. Vertical integration refers to a model where a company controls or owns multiple stages of the production, distribution, and supply chain of its products or services within a single industry. Now, when I can relate that definition to the music industry, I could tell you Time Warner, at the time it was known as Time Warner, is a vertically integrated company. That means HBO and Time Inc. and all the other Warner Music Group at the time, they had their own profit centers, their own presidents, their own doing business to the mothership, the mother company, Time Warner. Sony Music Entertainment at the time was what I would say horizontally integrated because they would work with Sony Pictures and Sony Electronics to promote the same product. So if you had a movie coming out on Columbia Pictures, Columbia or Epic Records would put out the soundtrack and then they'd make a game out of it. If it was like a Spider-Man movie, for example. So therefore, there's nuances in horizontal integration, but when layoffs occur, the horizontally integrated companies are the first to go. The vertically integrated companies, you can spin them off, make some of them go public, make some of them end up being invested by another private company, a media company in that example, or they might centralize on their biggest profit center and become a new parent company by default, but still continue to promote the main revenue driver. And that being said, NYU Langone Health became vertically integrated when it was originally horizontally integrated, when Mount Sinai continued to just acquire hospitals that were losing money and they wanted to bring them in on their budget line. And I don't know, for the New York City area, this is what I'm focusing on. It's not always foolproof. If you watch the news out there, there's this talk about closing Beth Israel Hospital and now delaying the closing for whatever reason that's going on. That's because Beth Israel has a legacy on its own, but when it was acquired by Mount Sinai, they were losing money. So there's questionable issues going on behind the scenes that I'm unaware of that does not give me the sense that they're focused on my healthcare needs. So I want to look at the vertically integrated company that maintains some of its legacy. And in this case, as I said, the legacy at NYU Langone was its hospital system. I noticed about 10, maybe 12 years ago, when an alumnus from NYU named Kenneth Langone outright rebranded the NYU Medical Center, it became the equivalent of someone taking ownership of it, but with a philanthropic level of thinking. Now, in other words, healthcare basically is about the human being. There's a lot of empathy involved. There's a lot of mortality rates to consider. There's issues of advocacy, right? You can't turn a human being and their healthcare problems into a product or a service. It just doesn't work. You're dealing with the intangibility of a human being's life. So that's the way he took all of his own money, well, whatever bucket of money he had to give to the university, rebranded as the NYU Langone Health System, and therefore the university became.
Hey, folks, just so you know, we were worried about Frank's visual, which kind of froze, and we lost his visual if you're watching this live or if you're going to watch this later. And unfortunately, we were worried that once we lost his visual, we would lose his audio as well. And we were hanging on tight. I was really nervous. We were typing in the background. And unfortunately, yes, we did lose Frank and his audio. His system crashed. Maybe speaking of vertical integrations. And so we're hoping to get him back soon. But in the meantime, let me make some comments about some of the things that he was sharing, because I like to pull some threads through his ideas. So number one is that he was describing to us how to think through which hospital might be right for you, or hospital system or set of systems, and which may include clinics. And what's super interesting is when you know how it's set up, not just about reputation, but like, is their technology up to date? That was a really interesting thing to think about. You know, what do you notice when you walk into the system, right? Does it feel like they're up to date? Are you using an electronic medical system, for example? That's an up-to-date thing to look for, right? And the second that I really pulled out of this from a patient's perspective, but also from a positive, healthy healthcare perspective, is it a teaching and research hospital? Many times, teaching and research hospitals are focused on staying up to date on what works best for patients now as compared to in the past. 20 years ago, the research was useful, but it might not be useful now. It might not apply to some things now. We've done so much new research these days. So that's why it's really important, right? So teaching and research hospital. Hello, Frank. Welcome back. I'm glad you were able to join us. And, I'm just recapping a little bit about what you shared. Okay. So let me sort of close that out. We're going to go to an ad break after I sort of recap, and then we have Frank back for his final commentary. So one of the things that I think is especially interesting when you're looking at whether it's a teaching and research hospital or not is it learning oriented? So it sounds similar, but it's different. Because I've worked for the Department of Veterans Affairs, I can tell you that in about 2012, they made this massive shift based on Amy Edmondson's research on teaming and psychological safety, where she found that ER systems, healthcare systems that focused on a learning organization set of principles with psychological safety and continuous improvement processes, it helped the patients, but it also helped the providers do better and enjoy their work. And it was a team-based model. And so they went from teaching only to everyone learning, not just imparting information, but everyone learning. And it's a patient-centered model as well. So I really appreciated, Frank, that you brought that into the picture as well. When we come back after the ad break, I want to sort of pull all of this together around like, if we're not all MBAs and we can't figure out if there's like a vertical integration, horizontal integration, was there a merger and acquisition? What can we tell? What are the signals in our environment, right? Are there signals? I think you have an answer to that. And then moving into like, what's next for Frank Harrison? So you're listening to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu. Frank is back, and he'll be back right after these messages. Are you a high-achieving, growth-oriented leader? Are you interested in developing your authentic leadership while creating a healthy, inclusive workplace? Hi, I'm Dr. Mira Brancu, host of The Hard Skills on talkradio.nyc at 5 p.m. Eastern on Tuesdays, where we discuss how leaders develop the hard skills needed to make a greater impact. We interview experts, have live coaching, and tackle these challenges. Listen to The Hard Skills on Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern on talkradio.nyc.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the nonprofit sector connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on talkradio.nyc, I host a program, Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest, Frank R. Harrison. Our poor, wonderful engineer in the background is so frustrated right now because they stress tested this yesterday to make sure that they didn't lose Frank. And it happened anyway. The crash happened. You know what, though? We're talking about navigating complexity, and technology is by far adding the most complexity to our systems.
Yes.
So it's all good. You know, this is what we lean into, right? This is the thing.
I have to just say, I was so engaged in everything I was saying about Ken Langone. Did that even come across, or was it cut off?
We heard everything. We just lost your visual.
Okay,
And
so
then,
when I came back, it was a matter of watching me disappear, and then I came back, and we just wrapped up.
yeah. Mhm.
Oh, good. So it wasn't like a gap of no communication.
No. There
Fine
was
with
yeah, there was information, and then I filled in a little bit of a gap when you were trying to get back in. So it's all good. Let's talk about how do patients pick up the signs of like a healthy system, whether it's vertical integration, horizontal. You started mentioning like you notice that they bring in their interns. You notice that the reputation is good. You notice that the technology is up to date, right? Are there any other signs that patients can look for with a healthy system?
Well, first go in, as I said, totally armed with information about the doctor you are seeing, whether it's, again, their research experience, do they teach for NYU's hospital system? At the same time, also, when you're meeting this doctor, are they giving you a good bedside manner? Are they giving you feelings of, well, wait a minute, that's not appropriate to ask. Believe it or not, this is when your intuition is supposed to be adhered to, because you're talking about your own life, your own health. If you don't feel good about that person for whatever reason, even if they're fully credentialed, you have the right to say, I will see someone else about my condition, but thank you for your time. People can feel confident about making that choice because it's about your health care. You don't have to ask permission to make a choice of a doctor, especially if, God forbid, you have a condition that could be fatal if it's not treated in time.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I would say the thing to look out for is listen to your gut.
Yeah.
And you know where
Absolutely.
I learned that from? By watching Grey's Anatomy during the pandemic. I watched all 15 seasons at that time. And I almost feel like that motivated me to contact Sam to restart Frank About Health, because I had been with the network in 2016 for like 3 months or 4 months. But with the Zoom technology that he was introducing at the time, I was just saying, I want to relaunch the show. And I was only going to talk about COVID, but everything else grew out of that.
Yeah.
So
It
use
is,
your
it
gut.
is,
Go ahead.
yeah, it is true. I mean, well, you studied neuropsychology, right? And so did I. And so when Frank says, listen to your gut, there is a scientific mechanism to what happens
Right.
when your brain picks up on so many subtle signals that's not consciously being processed by your frontal lobe as something that makes sense.
Yes.
Right? Your frontal lobe makes sense of a lot of things, but it isn't processing every input that is coming into your brain. But there are other mechanisms, like your amygdala, that is firing, right? When you're getting nervous about something and you don't know why,
Right.
trust it. There's a reason you have that in your
Yes.
brain. And it is to pick up on other things that you might not be able to make sense of. That's your gut right there. That's your gut.
And also for me, when my hypothalamus is overacting, I
Mm.
get a warm sensation in my stomach. I don't know if that
Fascinating.
you. What did you say?
I said fascinating.
That warm sensation, it's not hunger. It's saying this doesn't feel right, or this feels great. I should take a chance on this. And that's worked for me across my whole career. Most of the
Yeah.
jobs, actually all of the jobs that I've ever had, did not come from a recruiter. They came from the people I knew. They came from default conversations that had nothing to do with why I had met the person to begin with. And I walk out of there and they ask for my resume. That in itself led me on the path that has led me to now where I am. So I always go where I don't want to say where the wind blows, but I go where my gut takes me. And when I find that everything is working, except the technology problems we have, when everything is working and there's a nice flow, I know it was meant to be, or it's what I need to be focused on.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a great setup, Frank, for us to talk about why you're putting together all of this media stuff. Frank about health, health e-media. You did a documentary recently. What is motivating this creation? Where is your gut taking you next?
Well, it all happened around the fall of last year after the fires in Maui. And I found myself calling the people at Hilton, where I have a deal with them, a sponsorship deal that I'd never been able to put forth as quickly as I'd liked. But the thing is that I called the people in Maui and I asked them what attempts are going on to try to help rebuild or raise money for the displaced people and so forth and so on. So I was invited in December to go to a meeting at the location in Las Vegas where I and another partner have done this deal with them, and they had given us an opportunity to put forward Frank About Health to their management, the actual podcast platform. But I said I couldn't do the podcast without talkradio.nyc. So I said, let's do this. They gave me a nice stipend to put together a documentary that I would present to Hilton Management in 2025. But I have to get my grassroots audience. So I'm hoping to launch it on my new website that launches in about 4 weeks, 6 weeks, whenever everything is logistically coordinated, and grow that audience throughout the rest of the year, and then go to Hilton in January and present not just Frank About Health, but also the documentary and my new website, Healthy Media, so that we can now monetize all these properties and use some of the profit for the fundraising activities, like for the people of Maui, or maybe even raise money for not scholarship, but for medical research, or like if there are new cures for things being tested, or rather new tests for possible cures like cancer, maybe provide through a Healthy Media, my company, a trust or a grant to help do the medical research. So it is my corporate background that is working and driving and motivating all of this. But it is also at the same time my ongoing show, Frank About Health, that at the end of June will be 122 episodes. And so, therefore, I put together a documentary of the key guests that have had major influence on the evolution of the show. You were one of them. And at the same time, what I'm hoping is that when Hilton finally becomes involved, opportunities could abound besides fundraising. For example, streaming our shows from talkradio.nyc on their internal Hilton channel. Hilton as a brand, was very much involved in the vaccines or very much involved in COVID. The Hilton brands in New York City turned into essential worker hotels. And I had originally done my pilot for Frank About Health in one of them. And basically, they were interested in seeing that we could do a COVID podcast to help people during the mandates that ironically were lifted when I launched Frank About Health. So I ended up coming back with the Frank About Health brand rather than the initial brand that I had targeted at that point. Now,
Amazing. And just so I can sort of note that we have 1 minute to the ending, and I don't want to forget to make sure that people see and hear about these different websites that you have. So you have Frank R. Harrison with 2 R's.com, right? There is the health-e-media.com, which sounds like is continuously being updated, right?
It is, but it's at the same time a play on healthy.
Yeah, healthy. Yeah. And and then you have your YouTube playlist, which will be in the show notes for folks to be able to access. Yeah. So thank you so much. We really appreciated having you on the show today. Audience, what did you take away? And more importantly, what is one small change that you can implement this week based on what you learned from Frank? Share it with us on LinkedIn at Mira Brancu or Frank R. Harrison at talkradio.nyc so we could cheer you on. We're also on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, all over the place. But LinkedIn is where I live online, and that's where Frank is, among other places, and where I will respond.
And I want to make a few closing comments also.
Yeah, absolutely.
On Thursday's episode of Frank About Health, we're going to have 2 people, Phyllis Quinlan and Jennifer Griggs, who are going to talk about leadership and dignity in the healthcare workplace. So I'm actually inviting you to make an appearance if you can. If you can't, you can't. That's okay. But I wanted to just kind of do that as our crossover, even though that was not the original intention.
Awesome.
I also wanted to answer your other question that you asked me before. And the motivation, as I said, I'm being led in that direction. But if it wasn't for partnering with Hilton, I think I would not have the impetus fueled by the commercial aspect of healthcare. It is an industry in some respects, after all. So
Absolutely.
I want to thank you for inviting me so we could promote all of the ongoings, not just of our shows, but also of that upcoming documentary. And like Mira said, Healthy Media will actually launch around July sometime in tandem with the release of the documentary once it's finally edited.
Excellent. Very exciting. So we'll leave on that note. Thank you, Frank, for being with us. Thank you, talkradio.nyc. Have a great rest of your day wherever you're tuning in from. Bye, all.